Hello everyone, so we'll be getting started in 1 minute now. And as always, remember, if you've got any questions, please do post them up, and we'll answer any questions as we go. Today, this is your English revision. We'll be looking at paper 1, question 5 today. And do remember, if you're watching the English now, please do remember that if you do maths, to come back at 8 o'clock for the half an hour of maths revision as well. Just going to clear these up from there. Okay, and as you can see, we'll be looking at question 5 from the description of paper 1. So we'll get started. So what I've got here, and we'll scroll down, is I brought up last year's paper. We're going to have a look through this. We're going to be focusing on question 5, but we'll go through it all so you can have that recap of what the paper will look like. So remember, your front sheet will look pretty much identical to this one. This will be your exam that will be on the 5th of June this year. So on the 5th of June, this is the paper you'll be sitting, paper 1, which is our creative writing paper, please do remember. As we scroll down, you'll do the section A first, so that'll be your reading questions, questions 1, 2, 3 and 4. That'll be your section A, and remember that's worth 40 marks, and that will lead on to section B, which is also worth 40 marks. So your paper in total is 80 marks. Now, I know a lot of students always want to know, well, how many marks I need to get a grade 4 as a minimum. That's the minimum, isn't it? So as a rough guide, because do remember the criteria for the grade rounders does change each year. So it does change each year, so we can never 100% be certain. But what we're saying, you should be looking for 50% of the marks for a grade 4. So if the question we're going to look at today is worth 40 marks, we roughly want to be getting at least 20 out of 40 for that grade 4. So section B, you're advised to spend 45 minutes on this section, and it's one thing I've been saying to my students recently, and this is really important. In the exam this year, there will be nobody to tell you, you've had an hour, you've got 45 minutes left, move on to the writing now. And that can be a challenge, because if you've not managed to fully answer questions 1, 2, 3 and 4, you might be tempted to think, well, you know what, I'll spend 5 or 10 more minutes and just get this finished off. What's really important is that you don't do that, because as I've just mentioned, questions 1, 2, 3 and 4 together are worth 40 marks. Question 5 on its own is also worth 40 marks. So once you've done an hour of your exam, you must move on to question 5. And do remember that there won't be anybody to say you've had an hour, move on now. That is down to your time management. So it's really important that you do use your time wisely, and you do that time management. Once it's been an hour, move on to question 5. Make sure we spend at least 45 minutes on question 5. Okay, you're reminded of the need to plan your answer. The reason you need to plan your answer is very simple. A planned response to this question will be better. If you spend 5 minutes planning this response, it will be more effective than if you don't. You should leave enough time to check your work at the end. Really important, you do spend at least 5 minutes checking your work at the end. As we all know, spelling, punctuation and grammar is really important, and those are the type of things that you'll need to come back and read through again. And remember, we spoke about this in the past, know your weaknesses going into the exam. If you know yourself that, you know what, sometimes I do put capital letters where there shouldn't be capital letters. If you know that's a weakness of yours, that's one of the things that you can spend that last 5 minutes doing, reading through your work. My tutor always tells me that I use capital letters in the middle of sentences and I shouldn't. Read through your work, double check for that. So it's really important to spend that time at the end. So question 5, your local newspaper is running a creative writing competition and they intend to publish the winning entries. Either describe a journey by bus as suggested by this picture, or write a story about 2 people from very different backgrounds. Okay, now it's always up to yourself as to which one you pick. Personally, I've advised my students to go for the descriptive piece. Okay, the reason to that is, again, I'm going back to time, but it's really important. You've got 45 minutes for this task. Think to yourselves, does a piece of descriptive writing have an end? Well, it doesn't really, because a descriptive piece of writing is down to yourself as to how much detail you put into your descriptions. There is no picture that has to be perfectly described in every single element. This is describe a journey suggested by this picture. So if you think, well, I've described everything in that picture, but you know what, I didn't describe the reflection in the window. Well, that doesn't matter because it's suggested by this picture. The image you're describing in your mind may not be exactly like this. So descriptive pieces don't have a definitive end. So wherever you get up to in the exam, that is your ending. Whereas when you think about a narrative must have a beginning, a middle and an end. So if you don't finish your piece off, that is a big worry, because a narrative without an ending will not achieve the marks you need to get a grade 4. So that's why I do suggest to go for the descriptive, because it is more accessible. Okay, so I'm just going to close this down for now and bring up my live board so we can annotate the picture. Okay, here we go. So this is my live board. Try and get rid of that random dot that's in the image for us. Okay, so you're in the exam and that's the image you're going to use as a stimulus. So describe a journey by bus as suggested by this picture. Okay, now it's a technique we've spoke about in lessons recently, and it's proving to be extremely useful. So when you get in this, if you're planning your piece, feel free to annotate your exam paper as I am here and draw into 4 squares. Obviously with my mastery of art, these are very even squares and very well drawn lines. So split your piece into 4 images, because when people look at images as a whole, they tend to miss out the little details, the details that are really key and can create a wonderful piece of descriptive writing. So it's just like in our reading, where we really emphasise to use that zoom in technique, zoom in on the fine details. So by splitting an image up into 4 pieces, we're then going to ask you to look at these quarters separately, zoom in on these quarters individually, and by doing that you will naturally find more things to describe. Okay, so we've done 4 quarters. If I just consider the bottom left hand corner for myself, well, what elements can I pick out from this? Just looking at the bottom left hand corner, I'm first going to go to this lady at the front. Is there anything telling about it? Well, she's on the phone. Okay, think to yourself, well, what can I say? You know, can we add some emotion to this? Because emotion is really what describes wonderful writing. So in your plan, you've quartered it, you've identified this woman, she's on the phone. Decide, is she troubled with the conversation that's happening, or is she happy? Have a think about that. You know, define an emotion to have here. I'll see how well I can. Not very well. It's what perfect handwriting there is there. But that's really to hint to define an emotion there. You know, might want to write troubled, worried, scared. Think about the emotion that's happening within that phone conversation. The reason I'm going troubled is her eyebrows do seem to be turned down a little bit. So first off, a journey, you could describe this lady on the bus there having that conversation. You know, describe her facial features, describe the tone of her voice, describe her body language as she's on that phone conversation. Okay, also, we've got somebody else here. We've got a man here just on the edge, okay, and he's looking out at the window. And remember that this descriptive piece is suggested by this image. So think to yourself, well, he's looking out of this image, isn't he? So wonderful acronym there, WCHS, what can he see? So decide, what can he see, what is he looking at? This description is suggested by this image. So you see a man there, he's looking out of the window, what can he see? Make it intriguing. You know, you could either describe what he sees, or you can describe his, you know, facial features as that's happening. Okay, let's look at the bottom right hand corner. I'm first off going to be drawn to this lady here. I think my interpretation is she's looking at the woman on the phone. So that could be a description right there. This woman's obviously intrigued by the phone conversation. I think we can all admit that we're always all slightly tempted when you can overhear a conversation. You almost want to hear what's happening. You're almost in your head imagining the other side of the story, aren't you? So why is this woman so intently listening to this other person describe, is she nosy, or is she concerned for the woman? And describe that. Real small elements, it may seem insignificant, but the more small elements we pick out, the greater the image. The bus stop sign, you can describe that. It's a part of the bus journey. It's not the most amazing, the interesting thing, but you can describe the yellow, the red, you get your textures in, because remember about the 5 senses with descriptive writing, we need that. Top right hand corner, what can I zoom in on here? Well, first off, you could just describe the window. Secondly, the reflection of the lights in the window, we can describe those. Top left, again we've got the window, we've got the pole there. Okay, there's not as much in that one. I'd maybe pick out the sign you can see up there. What does that tell us is outside? So by splitting it into quarters and zooming in on the small elements within these quarters, you will find more things to describe. Okay, you've got the actual street behind there as well, haven't you? So it's describe a journey by bus suggested by his picture. So you can talk about what the bus sees, what the bus passes. That's completely fine. So remember, as I just mentioned there, it's really, really key. The 5 senses. When we're writing descriptively, it's really, really, really important that we use all 5 senses. The reason to that being that if we think of the average person does experience the world with all 5 senses. That is why we have them, to experience the world around us. Those senses create our knowledge of things. So you must use the 5 senses, because that's what creates a picture. Okay, you wouldn't expect your average film to be created without any sound, would you? Okay, would food be the same if you couldn't also smell it? I know you often read statistics, don't you? And I think there's one that comes to mind on that, and the fact that the taste of food is 95% the smell of the food. When you smell the food, you either instantly decide, well, I'm going to like that or I'm going to hate that. Even the look of the food, if you saw some grey, sludgy gruel, you'd almost, you'd instantly think, there's not a chance I'm eating that, it looks disgusting. You're instantly put off by the visual sense, aren't you? So think about your writing. Your writing has to engage all 5 senses to be effective. So with my wonderful art skills, once again, we've got sight, you've got smell, obviously that's a nose, you've got sound, you've got taste, and you've got, if I've got space to draw them, you've got touch as well. Okay, texture. Now when we say touch, think about the texture of things. So you don't, lots of students will say to you, well, when I describe this scene, I'm not going to talk about me touching everything. Well, if you think about it, that's not what we're getting. When we talk about the touch sense, we're talking about the texture of things, the feel of things. Okay, so we've got sight, smell, sound, taste and touch. So when you're writing descriptively, get all of those senses in. That is what will create the full image for your reader. And your reader is the examiner. The reason you want to make your writing wonderful is for the examiner, so he can award you the marks that you deserve. So we've thought about the image, we've talked about the senses. Now there's one tip I'm also going to talk about now as well. Okay, now this tip is completely optional. It works wonderfully for some students. For other students, they don't particularly like this one as much. So you've got this image in front of you in the exam. You know you need to write a piece of descriptive work. lots of students struggle to think of ideas. So one technique that we've just looked at is splitting the image into quarters. Okay, so we spoke about splitting the image into quarters and picking out the finer details from the image. Another useful technique to use is closing your eyes. I know it may seem ridiculous, you may feel like a bit like a fool as you do it, but it is really useful. So when you're in the exam, you got your eyes open, you can be distracted by things around you, the person's head in front of you, the lights, the floor, you look around you. You know, when you're struggling with things to think about, you know, you can have that mind block, can't you? You can have that brain freeze and you're worried, you're thinking, I can't think of anything. A wonderful technique to use when you're writing descriptively, and try it now. I just want you to put the idea of a bus journey in your head. Put just a bus journey in your head right now. Okay? Now close your eyes. So close your eyes and just picture that bus journey in your head now. What can you see in front of you? Think about a bus journey. What will happen? Who's on that bus? What are they doing? How busy is the bus? Think about that. Put that image in your mind now. Have your eyes closed when you do this. It really helps some students. So hopefully you tried that out as I was speaking to you. Know, you can give it another little go now if you want as well. Think about a busy shopping centre. Instantly with your eyes open you might just think, well, there'll be lots of people, there'll be shops. But you know, close your eyes now. Think about the different things those people are doing. Are they all the same age? Are they all the same gender? Are they in groups or are they on their own? Close your eyes and think about what you can see in front of you. You know, close your eyes and just think about the sounds that you can hear. There's not just footsteps, is there? You know, there's laughing, there's talk, there's maybe music in the background, there's maybe the sounds of a wheels on a pram that somebody pushes by. You know, there's maybe the sound of a water fountain. Okay, there's maybe the sound of a cashier putting money into the machines. There's maybe the sound of coat hangers on rails. You know, closing your eyes and just putting an image of what you're describing in there may very well help you, and it might help you focus on what you can write about. So that's another really helpful tip that can really help you when it comes to descriptive writing. We've gone through two there, haven't we? We've gone through breaking the image off into quarters and zooming in on those individual quarters. It can be a bit of a pitfall when you look at images as a whole to not really zoom in on the details. So we've got to split it into quarters, then zooming in on those quarters specifically and attaching emotions. And we've also got the really simple technique of just closing your eyes. You know, you may feel a bit silly closing your eyes in your exam and thinking, but if it helps you get that grade 4, if it helps you get closer to the grade that you want, so what if you feel a bit silly in the exam, closing your eye and thinking of an image. Okay, so what I'm going to move on to now is something that a lot of people ignore, but I'd honestly say it is one of the most useful revision tools there is. Okay, now these are published online every year and they are wonderful. When you're coming to do revision, they're one of the most useful things you can look at. So each year, after each exam, an examiner writes a report on the things they find out. So what that is the examiners had feedback from all the different examiners. Some people said this, some people said that, and then general assumptions as to what's been happening this year in the exams, and they feedback on the things that they liked and the things that they didn't like. So essentially, here is a document where the examiners are telling you, we like this and we don't like that. So another day we will go through the reading section, but for today, as we've just been looking at question 5, that's all we're going to look at. So I'll go through the general comments first. So these were the comments for last year. This was the first live paper for the new 8700 examination, set in line with the accredited specification and the previously published specimen materials, and it was very well received. The source taken from the Tidiness of Rosabelle by Catherine Mansfield was accessible to all. written in a way that less able students could track the overall narrative and begin to draw meaning, but also containing subtleties and nuances that challenge the most able. This resulted in students of all abilities genuinely engaging with the reading material and responding positively and confidently to the thematically linked writing stimuli. Okay, so they were quite happy with what they provided students, and they found that students were able to create good work. So, examiners do reflect on the exams that they publish. The examiners do think, well, did that work last year? Was that too challenging, or was that good? So here's the examiners being quite proud of themselves here, aren't they? They're very happy with what they did. So if they're happy with what they did last year, make sure you have a read of those texts from last year, because they were happy. They thought that those were accessible enough. So make sure you have a read of the sources and the questions that were last year. Well, we looked at one of the questions earlier on, didn't we? So question 5. So it's quite a bit of text here, but it's so useful, because here's the examiners literally going to tell you what they thought was good. So bearing in mind that this report is going to talk about both paper 1 and paper 2 in one. We've just looked at paper 1 today, but the examiner is reflecting on both. So both writing questions proved to be accessible to students, many of whom wrote with confidence and control. The first option, describing a journey by a bus, as suggested by a picture, was a slightly more popular choice. So here the examiner is actually saying that last year more students chose that one rather than the other one, possibly because there was a physical image there to aid imaginations, or maybe because travelling on a bus is in the realm of students' experience. There were many inventive viewpoints adopted of the bus itself, of the stop button on the bus, of a bus ticket, of a lamp post or a bridge that the bus passed. So I think it's really good to see that, the examiner, I mentioned it before, didn't I? I said it might seem ridiculous to look at a stop button, but the examiners picked out that quite a few students looked at that bit and it was effective. If you think about the fact that it's a stop button, how can you make that creative? Well, could somebody be having maybe an anxiety attack, and they almost need to get to that stop button, but they can't push themselves to get there? A lamp post, a bridge that was passed. So remember that image is there just to engage you and get you started. So we'll get back to where we were. Usually though, it was written from the perspective as a passenger, or sometimes of a driver. The journeys themselves varied between the literal and the metaphorical. A purgatory bus where passengers were dead but forever trapped, a prison bus, a bus ride through the countryside for an author with writer's block looking for inspiration, and an elderly gentleman's journey to heaven, using the bus metaphorically to reconnect him to his wife. Many, however, consisted of a drive through a rainy city centre at night, where students took their cue from source A and described the reflection of the lights on the window panes. So it's quite interesting what the examiner has spoken about there. The examiner said that there were a lot of metaphorical approaches that were really appropriate. A student has obviously written a piece about this bus being like a bus of the damned, taking the dead to another place. Remember that image is is a stimulus. They're not saying, here's an image, describe this image. What the examiners are saying with the images is, here's an image, use this to get you started. So that student's obviously said, right, a bus goes somewhere. Where could that bus be going? Hell, why not? And so they've then described this bus of the damned being taken, ferrying the dead to the afterlife. Okay, and quite a heartwarming one there, quite touching one as well, of a man being taken, lifted up to heaven to meet his wife who he's lost. So you can go metaphorical with these. You can use your imagination. It's really, really good to see. So it can be literal. So it is a bus, an everyday bus, going somewhere. Examiners are completely happy for you to do that, and they're completely happy for you to take a more imaginative approach. And what's also nice to see, and I know we've maybe mentioned this in some of our lessons, in the fact that, and if I look at this last line, consisted of a drive through a rainy city centre at night where students took their cue from source A and described the reflection of the lights on the window panes. Now, if you've looked at the Tenors of Roosevelt in your lessons, you'll know that they talk about the reflection in a window there, and we've said that you are given a piece of text in that exam that has wonderful spelling, punctuation and grammar, and is a very, very well constructed piece of writing with some wonderful skills shown. So use that piece of writing that you've got in front of you to help you. You can use that to help you. So students have spotted, well, that text had a woman on a bus, and now I've got this writing task that's asking me to use a bus as a stimulus. The examiner's done that specifically for a purpose. The writing task and the reading material will have a link, so use that link to your advantage. Is there any cues that you could take from the source to help you get started? Yeah, is there anything in the book that you could, is there anything in the text that you could use to help you with your writing to get you started? Okay. Students who opted for the narrative, a story about two people from very different backgrounds, also covered wide-ranging topics. Many focused on rich and poor, different religions or races, enemy soldiers, star-crossed lovers, although others were more inventive. Human and elf, modern man encounters cavemen through time travel, 1950s detective meets an enigmatic femme fatale, feuding families at the court of Versailles, and an angel sacrificing her immortality to save a human friend. So again, you can be imaginative, you can use wonderful writing for that narrative, you can be imaginative as you want. Might be as imaginative as you want. So you can have a read of this in more detail. I'm just going to leave it up on this bit. I'll zoom in onto paragraphs, and you can pause and read as you like. This bit's interesting. The addition of a reading question focusing on structure had obviously engaged some students to consider the shape of their own writing. So think about it. If the text has a flashback or a circular structure, use that to your advantage. Well, how's the writer in the extract done that? Can I repeat that in my piece of writing? Okay, then we'll carry on from there. I'm just going to start from the second page now. Some students adopted a circular structure or an extended metaphor then ran throughout their narrative, often with convincing and compelling results. Unfortunately, there was also considerable evidence of a lack of planning, and this is really key. Lots of students say, well, I go into my exam and I don't actually plan my response, I just write it. But if we listen to it, and this is the examiner's report on what they have seen, occasionally spider diagrams were used, which may generate ideas but do not help with organisation or cohesion, whilst other plans consisted of mnemonics, usually linguistic techniques the student intended to include regardless, which may aid some of the less able students but tends to stifle the creativity of the most able. A lack of planning also resulted in unnecessarily lengthy responses, where the more a student wrote, the greater the deterioration in ideas, structure and accuracy. Many students would have benefited from a quality rather than quantity approach. Having the confidence to take time to plan and then craft a shaped and structured response in 2 or 3 sides, with time at the end to revise and improve. This would certainly have helped those who started ambitious narratives but managed to get no further than establishing the 2 characters because they set out to achieve the impossible in the time given. There were further 2 areas where students were less successful. Firstly, a tendency to produce formulaic responses with a contrived use of senses. I can see, I can hear, I can smell, usually with reference to nostrils. And secondly, the inclusion of over-ambitious vocabulary that sounded sophisticated but was frequently misused and obscured meaning. Okay, so what the examiner's talking about there is that students sometimes went in or knowing too much what they were going to write before they didn't. They wrote it, we spoke about this in lessons, a bit too much like a list. So I can see this and I can hear that and I can smell this. You don't want to be writing as a list. I did this and then I did that and then I did this and then I saw that. It's too much like a list. It gets very repetitive and very boring. So we want you to be creative using those 5 senses. Okay. Don't shoehorn things in just because you think they should be, and don't think, well, I know I need to put language devices in, so I'm just going to write some. Don't do that. Make sure that they come naturally. By planning your work, it will happen. By planning your work, you'll show an understanding. You won't get marks for that plan, but it will show in your writing. Okay. So that's the examiner's report. I'll leave that last page up if you want to pause it and read further another time on those bits, because I've just picked up the key parts from there. So from that examiner's report, remember that you can write metaphorically, you can use your imagination. It doesn't have to literally be just that image. Use your imagination, let it run wild sometimes if that suits you. Okay, 100% make sure you plan your response. Don't think you can just write it. Do spend 5 minutes planning it. It's quality rather than quantity, just like the examiner themselves have said that. They want quality writing rather than reams and reams and reams. So take that time to plan and then write it. What the examiner is also saying is they don't want a repetitive approach. They don't want seeing lists of I can see this and I can hear this and I can smell this. Make sure it flows naturally. Okay. So splitting your image into 4 quarters, zooming in on those individual quarters, using all your 5 senses, maybe closing your eyes to help you think of the image, to create that image in your mind and then plan from there. Use this examiner's report to help you. The examiner is looking for a well thought out, well structured piece of writing. Okay, don't force things in. The examiner can tell when things are forced. Okay, so thank you for listening today. If you do have any questions, make sure you email us, and if you need that email again, I promise, I'd like to change that, I do promise that I will try to improve my writing skills on these tablets. That is a D. So that's English and Maths at wigan-lee.ac.uk. So any questions, do email us in. We will respond to you within the day. Any questions at all, email us. And remember to tune back in if you do maths at 8 o'clock for the maths revision session. Thank you and goodbye.